Time is supposed to be the one constant in our world, steady, predictable, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations. Yet scattered across the oldest surviving records are whispers of moments when that constancy shattered, when reality itself seemed to hesitate, flicker, or fold. Ancient scribes describe days that vanished from the calendar without explanation, as though the sun had forgotten to rise. Others wrote of nights that stretched unnaturally long, swallowing hours beyond measure until even seasoned astronomers questioned their instruments. And then there are the most unsettling accounts of all, stories of scholars who claim to meet travelers arriving from futures not yet lived, or who encountered versions of themselves that should not have existed. These fragments appear in cultures separated by oceans and centuries. A Babylonian clay tablet, a Chinese court chronicle, a Mayan stela carved under the weight of ceremony. None were written as myth, none were meant as metaphor. They sit buried in historical archives like quiet warnings, stubborn anomalies scribbled by people whose lives depended on precision. These were not storytellers inventing legends. They were record keepers, mathematicians, priests, and astronomers documenting what they believed to be real. If their words are to be believed, then there were moments, fleeting, rare, but profoundly disturbing when time itself trembled. When the world beneath their feet no longer aligned with the heavens above. When sequences broke, cycles stuttered, and something unseen tugged at the edges of existence. For centuries, scholars have tried to rationalize these claims. Translation errors, exaggerations, atmospheric distortions, anything to preserve the comforting illusion that time is linear and obedient. Yet the records remain, persistent and unyielding, refusing to be dismissed. So we must ask the question the ancients themselves feared to voice. What if time has never been as stable as we assume? And what if those long-forgotten observers weren't witnessing miracles or omens, but fractures? Subtle breaks in a system we barely understand. Because if time can falter, if it can slip, repeat, or distort, then these ancient records aren't just curiosities. They're evidence, clues left across millennia marking the rare moments when the universe revealed its deepest flaw. For generations, mainstream historians have brushed these unsettling accounts aside, filing them neatly under superstition, mistranslation, or poetic exaggeration. It is far easier to assume ancient people misunderstood natural events than to entertain the possibility that time itself might have faltered. Yet a closer look at the origins of these records reveals a troubling contradiction. Many were written not by mystics or storytellers, but by the most disciplined minds of their age. Astronomers who charted stars with astonishing accuracy. Mathematicians whose calculations still impress modern. Scholars, royal chronologists entrusted with documenting the heartbeat of an empire. These individuals had nothing to gain by fabricating anomalies. Their reputations depended on precision, not wonder. And still, across continents and centuries, they all described moments that defied the structure of time. Hours that vanished, cycles that broke, events seemingly displaced from their rightful positions in history. If these were mere myths, why do they appear in administrative logs, temple archives, and imperial observatories? Documents never meant for public awe. Why do their descriptions align so closely despite cultural isolation? This documentary follows those forbidden pages, tracing the cracks they reveal. Because the real question may not be whether the ancients misunderstood reality, but whether reality briefly slipped from their grasp. Across the ancient world, long before modern science tried to cage the nature of reality, there existed a quiet class of observers whose lives revolved around precision. These were the scholars, astronomers who charted the courses of planets with stunning accuracy, mathematicians who carved numerical truths into stone, and record keepers tasked with preserving history exactly as it unfolded. In civilizations like Babylon, Greece, India, and China, these individuals were not entertainers. They were not myth-makers. They were custodians of order in a world that constantly shifted around them. Their purpose was simple: observe, record, and preserve. And it is exactly within their writings, the ones created with unwavering discipline, that we find the most disturbing anomalies. These scholars documented celestial alignments to the fraction of a degree, yet in those same logs wrote of nights that stretched beyond reason, hours that disappeared from sundials, and events that reappeared twice as though time itself had hiccuped. These are not the types of details inserted lightly. A deviation of even a few minutes could disrupt agricultural cycles, religious rituals, and royal ceremonies. For a scholar to admit confusion was to risk credibility, yet they did, again and again. Consider the Babylonian astronomers of ancient Sippar who recorded planetary motion so accurately that modern computers still marvel at their calculations. Among those same tablets lie warnings of celestial pauses, wandering hours, and disturbances in the predictable rhythm of the heavens. In Greece, chroniclers known for logical reasoning recorded testimonies of temporal duplication with a level of detail inconsistent with folklore. And in China, imperial court scholars, whose errors could cost them their lives, documented nights that simply lasted too long to be natural. The consistency of their fear, their confusion, and their meticulous wording raises a troubling possibility. These were not tales meant to inspire devotion or fear. They were honest accounts of something they witnessed but could not explain. And because their role was to serve truth, they wrote it down, even when it contradicted the very structure of time that governed their world. If we trust their mathematics, their star charts, their calendars, can we truly dismiss the anomalies they recorded with equal care? For most ancient scholars, observation was a calm, almost sacred act. Their writings are typically steady, measured, precise, yet in certain rare passages the tone shifts, the ink tightens, the language trembles. Suddenly, these disciplined observers abandon their usual detachment and slip into something closer to fear. It is in these moments that the historical record becomes emotionally charged, revealing just how deeply the anomalies disturbed them. A Chinese court chronicle notes that astronomers looked to one another in dread as stars froze above the horizon. A Greek historian admits that a temporal duplication shook the minds of all who witnessed it. Mayan scribes described the sky as folding, choosing words that feel more like a cry for help than a poetic flourish. These reactions matter. Scholars who dedicated their lives to neutrality broke that neutrality only when confronted with something that defied reason. Their fear becomes part of the evidence. It tells us these events were not simply unusual, they were destabilizing. They forced even the most rational minds of the ancient world to question the fabric of existence. And if their certainty shattered so easily, what exactly were they seeing? The Maya built one of the most sophisticated timekeeping systems in human history, an intricate fusion of astronomy, mathematics, and ritual cycles. Their long count calendar mapped thousands of years with almost uncanny precision, tracking celestial events modern astronomers only recently confirmed. It was a system so refined, so interwoven with the movements of the sun and stars, that for it to falter seemed impossible. Yet buried within the glyphs of several stelae lies a strange inconsistency. A repeated day, a double sunset, a cycle that appears to have folded in on itself. According to certain inscriptions, a day began normally, progressed into evening, and then seemed to reset. The sun, already touching the horizon, appeared to rise slightly before descending again. To the Maya, who measured time with sacred devotion, this was not a trivial anomaly. This was a cosmic rupture. Their priests, who observed the heavens daily, documented the event with unsettling clarity. Why would they record such a mistake? And more importantly, why would they alter the calendar afterward to compensate for it? If the Maya had misinterpreted a natural event, a mirage, a solar halo, or an eclipse, their astronomer priests would have recognized it immediately. They were accustomed to the rare and the extraordinary, but the tone of the inscriptions, the corrective marks in the long count, and the ceremonial responses suggest something far stranger occurred. An event that forced them to reconsider the very cycles they believed governed the universe. The lost day is not simply a calendrical anomaly. It is a historical ripple, carved into stone by a civilization that understood time better than almost any other. And it raises a question no modern explanation fully resolves. What could make a perfect calendar break? Among the Mayan elite, the astronomer priests were revered not for mysticism but for measurable accuracy. Their predictions guided crops, coronations, wars, and rituals. So when the folding of the sky occurred, their reaction was not to embellish or mythologize. It was to document the event with terse, almost reluctant precision. Several inscriptions describe a moment when the heavens bent, or the day repeated its shadow. Cryptic phrases that hint at a disturbance beyond natural experience. What stands out is how carefully the Maya avoided interpreting the anomaly. They described what they saw, but they did not speculate on what caused it. This silence is uncharacteristic. The Maya routinely offered spiritual interpretations for eclipses, comets, and planetary alignments. But for this, nothing, as though the truth was too destabilizing to commit to stone. Some archaeologists argue the inscriptions were ceremonial embellishments, yet that explanation falters when examined against the long count calendar's modifications. Adjustments were made, not symbolic but mathematical, to realign the count with celestial observations following the anomaly. Scholars do not rewrite calendars for metaphors, and so we are left with an unsettling contradiction. The Maya were confident enough to carve their cosmology in stone, yet for this moment, this rupture in time, they provided no cause, no explanation, no mythic context. Only a record. Silence can sometimes speak louder than words. In this case, it suggests they witnessed something they couldn't rationalize, something that defied even their extraordinary understanding of time. Modern scholars often attempt to soften the mystery by proposing natural explanations. An unusual solar refraction, a rare atmospheric phenomenon, a brief but intense geomagnetic disturbance. And while these ideas sound reassuring, they fail to fit the precision of Mayan observation. The Maya were experts in tracking the sun's movement across the horizon. They could predict solstices and eclipses centuries in advance. If the event had been a simple optical illusion, they would have noted it as such. Instead, they rewrote the calendar. Some propose a previously undocumented volcanic eruption scattering light in strange ways. Others suggest meteorological distortions. Yet none of these theories explain why the passage of the day itself seems to repeat on the inscriptions. The Maya did not describe a strange light or a distorted sun. They described time behaving abnormally. And then there is the greatest contradiction. Why does the anomaly appear in multiple regions, implying a broad, coordinated disturbance rather than a localized event? If we take the Maya at their word, the mystery deepens. They were not confused observers misreading a natural spectacle. They were seasoned astronomers documenting an impossible moment, one that forced them to revise their most sacred measure of reality. In the heart of the Han dynasty, long before mechanical clocks or telescopes, Chinese imperial astronomers watched the heavens with a discipline unmatched in the ancient world. Their observations were meticulous, their records precise, their duty sacred. And among these scrolls sits an account so unsettling that later scholars debated whether it should even be preserved. It tells of a night that simply refused to end, a darkness that lingered far beyond its natural span, stretching hours into something unrecognizable. The astronomers wrote that the stars held their positions longer than they should have, as if frozen in the canvas of the sky. No drifting, no rotation, no gradual descent toward dawn. The constellations remained suspended in a way that contradicted every cycle they had charted for generations. Confusion rippled through the observatory. These were men trained to identify even the slightest deviation in the heavens, and yet what they witnessed had no precedent. Villagers across the region lit lanterns until their oil ran out. Farmers waited restlessly for the morning bell that never sounded. Even the animals grew restless, as though sensing a distortion in the natural rhythm of the world. The records describe rising fear in the Imperial Academy. Scholars exchanged uneasy glances. Their instruments showed no error, but their senses insisted something was wrong. Hours passed while the sky remained unnervingly still. When dawn finally broke, it came abruptly, almost violently, with the sun leaping over the horizon as if catching up from a delay. This was no eclipse, no passing cloud bank, no celestial illusion. To the observers of the Han Dynasty, the very mechanism of time had stalled. The most disturbing detail is not the event itself, but how uniformly it was recorded. Multiple regions documented the same long night, implying it was not localized. Something affected the temporal rhythm of an entire empire. And just like that, time resumed, as if nothing had happened. When the account of the lingering night reached the imperial court, the emperor's reaction was swift and deeply secretive. To the Han rulers, cosmic order reflected earthly order. Any disturbance in the heavens could signal political danger, divine disapproval, or the approaching end of a mandate. The emperor summoned his most trusted scholars, not priests, not mystics, but the court astronomers whose precision legitimized his reign. The inquiry took place behind closed doors. Surviving records describe how the scholars presented their findings with hesitance, aware that any suggestion of heavenly imbalance could be perceived as criticism of the emperor himself. But even in their caution, they could not deny what they had seen. One report states that heaven adjusted its cycles, a phrase so bold it was nearly treasonous. The emperor, troubled by the implications, ordered a private investigation into whether this event aligned with any prophecies or celestial warnings. But the astrologers found no corresponding omen, no known cycle to map against. The disturbance was unprecedented. Rather than alert the public or modify imperial rituals, as was customary during celestial irregularities, the emperor suppressed widespread discussion. Only the most essential adjustments were permitted. It was as though acknowledging the anomaly too openly might give it power. What remains clear is that the imperial response was not one of dismissal. It was fear. And fear at that level suggests the event was far more profound than a mere atmospheric oddity. After the long night, subtle but deliberate changes appeared in official timekeeping. Astronomical logs show quiet corrections, shifts of minutes and hours that seem intended to realign the calendar with celestial progression. These were not ceremonial adjustments. They were mathematical recalibrations, made reluctantly and without explanation. The Han Dynasty valued temporal order with almost religious reverence. Every festival, tax cycle, military campaign, and agricultural schedule depended on accurate measurement. If the scholars altered the imperial calendar, it was only because the divergence between observed and expected time had become impossible to ignore. What's more intriguing is that these modifications were mirrored in regional records, suggesting the event affected a large geographic area. Independent offices far removed from the capital noted discrepancies in sundial shadows and water clocks, devices that should not fail simultaneously unless the underlying rhythm of time itself had been disturbed. The calendar corrections stand as quiet testimony. The scholars may not have understood the cause, but they knew something had gone awry. Time had slipped, paused, or stretched, and humanity, bound to its flow, had to adapt to the fracture left behind. In the aftermath, the empire moved forward. But the anomaly remained, an unspoken scar in the record of heaven and earth. Among the writings of early Greek historians lies a peculiar account attributed to a student of Heraclitus, the philosopher who famously taught that everything flows. The story concerns a merchant, ordinary in every respect, who sailed into a bustling Ionian port on a clear morning. Dock workers noted his arrival, merchants greeted him, and scribes recorded the cargo he carried. Nothing unusual. 2 days later, the same man arrived again, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Witnesses insisted it was the identical merchant, wearing the same clothes, carrying the same goods, even speaking the same words he had spoken upon his earlier arrival. His ship bore the same markings. His crew behaved as though repeating a memory. The duplication was so exact that scribes checking the records thought they were looking at a clerical error. The merchant himself seemed confused. To him, no repetition had occurred. He insisted he had simply sailed his route as always. Yet the dock workers swore otherwise. They had met this man before, precisely as he appeared now. It was as though the harbor had been forced to relive a moment, replaying an arrival with impossible precision. Heraclitus, fascinated by the anomaly, reportedly used it to challenge conventional ideas of time. If rivers could bend and turn back on themselves, could time do the same? Could a moment slip into a loop, replaying itself before moving forward again? The Greeks were not prone to superstition in their historical accounts. Their chronicles prized logic and clarity. For such an event to be recorded at all suggests it left an imprint on the community, an imprint powerful enough to defy reason. What happened that day in the Ionian harbor? A glitch in memory? A misperception shared by dozens? Or did time itself, for reasons unknown, double back upon its own path? Greek scholars prided themselves on rational thought. Their world was built on logic, debate, and the pursuit of order in a universe that often appeared chaotic. When confronted with the story of the duplicated arrival, they tried desperately to anchor it within the boundaries of reason. Was it deception? A trick of memory? An uncanny coincidence? Yet none of these explanations satisfied them. Too many witnesses, too many identical details, too many recorded statements affirmed the impossibility. Chroniclers from the era rarely allowed themselves to indulge in the supernatural. Even when describing omens, they maintained a tone of measured skepticism. But in this case, the narrative is uncharacteristically direct. There is no poetic language, no mythic symbolism. Only the blunt admission that something occurred which defied their understanding. Their discomfort is palpable. It is as if the anomaly insulted their worldview, mocking their commitment to logic. Some philosophers attempted mathematical interpretations, proposing that time might not be the uninterrupted sequence they believed it to be. Others saw it as evidence that human perception was flawed, that reality might be more malleable than the senses allowed. Yet no consensus emerged. Instead, the anomaly remained suspended in intellectual limbo, a challenge no scholar could fully reject or fully accept. In a civilization defined by reason, the illogical had forced its way in. The Greeks generally viewed time as linear, a steady march from past to future. But anomalies such as the duplicated arrival forced some thinkers to imagine a different model, one where time behaves less like a straight line and more like a flowing river. A river can bend, whirl, or double back on itself. It can create eddies, loops, and still pools where motion suspends. Heraclitus himself hinted at this possibility when he wrote that one cannot step into the same river twice. Perhaps his followers extended this analogy further, applying it not only to life but to time itself. If moments could swirl like water, then occasional loops or repetitions might occur naturally, not as miracles but as rare perturbations in a cosmic flow. Modern physics entertains ideas that oddly parallel these ancient speculations. Time dilation, gravitational distortions, space-time curvature. Yet the Greeks contemplated such concepts purely through observation and intuition. They recognized that the universe might not always obey the clean patterns philosophers preferred. The story of the duplicated merchant became more than a curiosity. It became a seed of doubt, a reminder that time might not hold the shape humans expect. And once doubt is planted, it changes how a civilization sees reality. In ancient Egypt, time was not merely observed, it was revered. Priests at the great temples of Karnak and Heliopolis devoted their days to tracking the sun's precise journey across the sky. Using shadow clocks, water clocks, and architectural alignments built with astonishing accuracy, they monitored every shift in daylight. Their rituals depended on the exact moment the sun touched the horizon. Their festivals followed the rhythm of the cosmos. To them, a single misplaced hour could disturb the harmony between heaven and earth. So when the sun halted, when its descent paused inexplicably above the horizon, the event struck at the core of Egyptian cosmology. A papyrus fragment from the 19th dynasty describes how priests gathered at the temple courtyard expecting dusk, only to find the shadows frozen in mid-stretch. The sun hovered longer than any living priest had ever witnessed, as though suspended by an unseen force. Confusion grew. The priests recalculated their measures again and again, but the readings remained unchanged. The sun refused to move. It was neither an eclipse nor a weather phenomenon. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath. Hours passed in a strange stillness. The ritual that depended on sunset was delayed, yet the priests could do nothing but watch, powerless before a cosmic irregularity. To question the sun's behavior was to question Ra himself, the divine embodiment of solar order. But the anomaly left no room for interpretation. Something had interfered with the celestial cycle. When the sun finally resumed its descent, the priests documented the event with reluctant honesty. Egyptians believed the gods interacted with the world through signs, but this sign had no precedent. It was not a warning, not a blessing, not a curse. It was something far more unsettling, a moment when the machinery of time misfired before the eyes of those who watched it most closely. After witnessing the halted sun, the priests retreated to the archives, a sacred space where centuries of observations were stored. What should have been a calm process of documentation instead became a quiet panic. Their writings, usually confident and orderly, betray a rare uncertainty. One scroll describes the priests questioning the path of Ra. Another notes that the hours became confused, a phrase unlike anything found in routine records. Their fear was not simply spiritual, it was practical. Egyptian rituals followed strict timing, and any distortion threatened to unravel the cosmic balance they worked tirelessly to maintain. The priests debated whether the anomaly signaled divine displeasure or an omen of political instability. Such events, even misunderstood ones, could ripple across the entire kingdom. Rituals were postponed, recalibrated, or repeated entirely. Some priests attempted emergency offerings to restore cosmic order, while others urged caution, warning against misinterpreting a phenomenon that seemed to defy all known cycles. The disagreement itself reveals how unprecedented the event was. What troubled them most was not fear of punishment, but fear of ignorance. The archives held thousands of years of solar data, yet none resembled this. Their tools were accurate, their methods refined, their measurements consistent. The failure, then, was not theirs. It was something external, something that disrupted the fundamental order of time itself. For a society built on celestial certainty, the realization was devastating. Egyptian bureaucracy was meticulous. Every significant event, ritual, and decree was logged with exact timing. So when a gap appeared in the pharaoh's official records, missing hours erased without explanation, it caused scholars to question why such a breach was allowed. The royal tomb inscriptions and palace logs show a discontinuity on the day of the halted sun. Instead of recording the extended daylight, scribes simply omitted the segment, as though rewriting reality to preserve order. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate decision. In Egyptian administration, errors were corrected, not erased. But here the hours vanished, removed to align the record with how time was supposed to flow. The priests and scribes, unable to explain the anomaly, chose instead to protect the illusion of cosmic stability. The silence speaks volumes. By removing the evidence, they acknowledged that the truth was too disruptive to preserve. Their world depended on predictable cycles, and anything suggesting the opposite was dangerous, not just socially, but cosmologically. Thus, the missing hours remain one of Egypt's most enigmatic archival gaps, a quiet reminder that even the most ordered civilizations sometimes recorded moments when reality itself stepped out of line. Among the stories preserved in ancient Vedic literature, one stands out not for its mythic grandeur, but for its eerie resonance with modern notions of time distortion. It tells of a learned sage who journeyed to a heavenly realm, briefly it seemed, and returned to find that centuries had passed on Earth. What he experienced as moments unfolded as lifetimes for those he left behind. Entire dynasties had risen and fallen. Students he had taught were long dead. The world he knew had transformed beyond recognition. Most treat this as a spiritual allegory, a tale meant to illustrate impermanence. Yet this interpretation falters when placed beside the extraordinary mathematical precision of Vedic astronomers. These were the same thinkers who calculated planetary orbits with near-modern accuracy, who conceptualized enormous cosmic cycles, who outlined theories of time that stretch eerily close to contemporary physics. Why would a culture capable of such disciplined observation preserve a story that contradicts natural law? Unless it was based on something they genuinely feared or witnessed? Some texts describe the sage experiencing a different flow of time, as though he temporarily occupied a region where temporal rhythm diverged from earthly cycles. His return, marked by shock and disorientation, captures something deeply human. The realization that time is not a universal constant. It can accelerate, it can decelerate, it can fragment. Vedic scholars did not dismiss the account. Instead, they integrated it into discussions of cosmic structure, using it as an example of how time might behave differently in various realms of existence. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the narrative reveals a sophisticated understanding. The ancients believed time could stretch or compress under extraordinary conditions. And perhaps more importantly, they suspected humans could stumble into these distortions without warning. The universe, in their view, was not just vast, it was unpredictable. The more one examines ancient Sanskrit texts, the clearer the pattern becomes, mathematical precision woven seamlessly into spiritual language. Vedic astronomers calculated the solar year with astonishing accuracy. They estimated the distance to the sun with ratios startlingly close to modern values. They mapped the motions of planets with numerical elegance. This was not a civilization prone to careless metaphor. So when these same texts describe time behaving non-linearly, we must pay attention. Verses reference cycles within cycles, moments that expand, and ages that unfold like breaths. These descriptions, though poetic on the surface, mirror concepts we now understand as nested time scales, microseconds within seconds, epochs within eras. One hymn describes a period in which 1,000 human years pass in a single day of the gods. Many argue this is symbolic, yet it reflects a surprisingly intuitive grasp of relative time frames. Another passage speaks of the measure of time depending on the observer, an idea astonishingly similar to relativity's insight that time is not absolute but relative to motion and gravity. It is in this context that the story of the sage becomes less myth and more speculation, an attempt to describe a real but incomprehensible temporal distortion. If anyone in the ancient world could have recognized such a phenomenon, it would have been the Vedic mathematicians. Their writings suggest they weren't simply imagining these events, they were documenting anomalies in the only language available to them, a fusion of mathematics, philosophy, and awe. When modern physicists speak of time dilation, seconds stretching under immense gravity or near the speed of light, it sounds like the domain of advanced technology and cosmic extremes. Yet the Vedic texts hint at an ancient awareness of similar principles. Not in equations, of course, but in ideas, that time can flow differently depending on one's state, one's position, or one's realm. The parallels are striking. The sage who experienced moments while centuries passed elsewhere resembles astronauts traveling near light speed, returning younger than the world they left behind. The descriptions of layered time echo models of space-time curvature. Even the suggestion that observers determine the measure of time touches the edges of quantum theory. These overlaps do not mean the ancients understood relativity as we do, but they imply something more provocative, that their observations or their stories may have been inspired by events that resisted ordinary explanation. Perhaps they encountered moments when the universe briefly revealed its deeper nature, moments when time felt elastic instead of fixed. The ancients turned these anomalies into philosophy and myth. Today we turn them into equations. But the mystery at their core remains the same. Why does time sometimes behave like anything but a constant? When viewed individually, each ancient anomaly appears as a strange but isolated event, a curiosity tucked away in the margins of history. But when placed side by side, a far more unsettling pattern emerges. The Maya reported a day that doubled. The Chinese observed a night that would not end. The Egyptians witnessed the sun stall above the horizon. The Greeks recorded a moment that replayed itself with uncanny fidelity. Cultures separated by oceans, languages, and entire worldviews describe disturbances that echo one another with alarming precision. These records were not part of shared mythology. They were not born from cultural exchange or trade routes. Many of these civilizations had no contact whatsoever, yet they documented experiences that fit the same mold: time slipping, stretching, repeating, or freezing. Even the emotional tone matches. Scholars wrote of confusion, fear, disbelief, reactions grounded in real observation rather than ritual storytelling. Across continents, the anomalies share three traits. First, they were witnessed by trained observers: astronomers, priests, chronologists. Second, they disrupted essential systems of measurement: calendars, rituals, administrative logs. Third, they were preserved, reluctantly, without embellishment, as though the writers hoped future generations might understand what they could not. The consistency is impossible to ignore. Why would so many civilizations without contact or influence describe the same impossible behavior of time. Either they all experienced identical illusions, which defies probability, or they witnessed real events triggered by forces beyond their understanding. When history begins to repeat its mysteries across cultures, we can no longer view these anomalies as isolated accidents. They become data points, clues hinting at a pattern woven through human experience. And if there is a pattern, then perhaps these ancient glitches were not errors at all, but symptoms of a deeper truth about the nature of time itself. If temporal anomalies appeared in multiple civilizations, another question arises. Were these global events? Records from different regions sometimes align in eerie proximity. The Mayan lost day occurs around the same estimated period as a documented disruption in Chinese astronomical logs. The extended night described in Han texts echoes an Egyptian account of prolonged darkness. These similarities may be coincidental, but the timing feels too deliberate, too synchronized. Ancient societies were more isolated than we often assume. Without global communication, shared interpretation was impossible. Yet their descriptions parallel one another so closely that it suggests a common trigger. Could solar activity have caused worldwide distortions? Could cosmic forces unknown to us today have brushed against Earth with enough influence to warp environmental or temporal perception on a massive scale? Geomagnetic storms can disrupt technology, but what about civilizations that relied solely on celestial cycles? A sudden lag in Earth's rotation, even a slight one, would have been immediately noticeable to trained astronomers. Though modern science acknowledges these variations, none account for the magnitude described in these accounts. If these anomalies were global, they suggest Earth itself may have encountered an event, natural or otherwise, that brushed against the boundaries of time. The ancients left fragments of testimony. Aligning them might reveal a timeline of disruption written across continents. The more we examine the correlations, the more it seems the ancient world may have experienced a cosmic disturbance that touched humanity on a scale far greater than we imagine. There is another possibility, one far more controversial yet difficult to dismiss. What if these anomalies were not natural events but evidence of an ancient knowledge now lost? Some researchers propose that an advanced civilization predating recorded history understood aspects of time that modern science is only beginning to grasp. If such a culture existed, traces of their knowledge might survive only as distorted memories, myths, or unexplained anomalies preserved by later societies. The idea is tempting because it fills the gaps. How did early mathematicians achieve such precision? Why do so many ancient texts hint at nonlinear time? Why do the anomalies appear structured rather than random? This perspective does not claim that the ancients built time machines or manipulated timelines. Instead, it suggests they may have encountered remnants of a science beyond their comprehension, artifacts, energies, or natural phenomena that behaved according to different rules. Mainstream scholars reject this interpretation, favoring simpler explanations. Yet simplicity does not always reflect truth. History is full of forgotten technologies and lost knowledge. Perhaps time itself was once studied with a depth we no longer possess. If so, these anomalies are not glitches. They're echoes, faint remnants of a knowledge erased by the tide of ages. Though many academics dismiss ancient temporal anomalies as fantasy, a small group of physicists, astronomers, and researchers quietly treat them as valuable data points. They argue that extreme, rare natural events often leave subtle traces in mythology or historical texts. Just as stories of global floods mirror real geological transitions, perhaps distortions of time recorded in ancient scrolls hint at phenomena we have yet to explain. Some astrophysicists suggest these accounts could reflect interactions with high-energy cosmic events, gamma bursts, solar flares, or gravitational disturbances. Though such occurrences rarely affect human perception directly, even slight alterations to Earth's rotation or magnetic field could produce experiences ancient observers interpreted as temporal instability. Others look toward more exotic possibilities. Micro black holes passing near Earth, fluctuations in space-time curvature, or unknown cosmic particles could theoretically create localized distortions. These ideas remain speculative yet not impossible. Einstein's theories predict that time bends, slows, and accelerates depending on gravity and motion. If nature can warp time under extreme conditions, then ancient records documenting anomalies may be the earliest human encounters with these distortions. What intrigues modern scholars most is the consistency and precision of these ancient descriptions. When Mayan or Chinese astronomers document unusual celestial behavior, they do so with discipline. Their accounts are not legends, they are measurements. Privately, some physicists admit that ancient testimonies may hold clues useful for understanding rare cosmic events. Publicly, however, they stay silent. Academia does not look kindly on theories that lean too close to forbidden history. Yet the question lingers. If ancient people witnessed real distortions of time, how would we recognize those events today? And more importantly, are similar anomalies still happening, unnoticed in our own era? If we assume the ancient anomalies were real, what exactly did the scholars witness? The possibilities are vast and unsettling. Some researchers propose subtle shifts in Earth's rotation, micro delays or accelerations caused by tectonic or cosmic influences. These changes, though minuscule, could lengthen nights or repeat daylight cycles, observable only to experts who track the heavens with precision. Others consider geomagnetic storms. Intense bursts of solar energy can distort atmospheric patterns and confuse natural cues used to track time. But such events, while dramatic, do not explain repeated days or frozen stars. They do not alter the actual progression of time, only its appearance. More speculative theories point to gravitational anomalies. A massive celestial object passing near Earth could warp the space-time field enough for observers to perceive irregular flow. Even a brief encounter could generate disturbances detectable by ancient astronomers. Still others suggest consciousness plays a role. What if time behaves differently at a perceptual level during certain cosmic or environmental states? This raises philosophical questions the ancients grappled with, but we rarely dare to confront. Ultimately, modern science can propose mechanisms, but none fully match the recorded events. The ancients described not illusions but fractures, moments when the universe behaved outside known laws. If time is not linear, then the anomalies may represent glimpses of its true fluid nature. Beyond scientific speculation lies a realm of theories that push against the boundaries of what society accepts. Some researchers quietly suggest that temporal distortions could arise from parallel realities brushing against ours. When two timelines intersect, even momentarily, events might repeat, freeze, or shift out of sequence. Ancient witnesses, lacking modern terminology, could only describe what they saw. Duplicated arrivals, halted suns, elongated nights. Others hint at instability within the fabric of space-time itself. If the universe undergoes constant fluctuations at a fundamental level, occasional disruptions might manifest as anomalies detectable only by those observing carefully. Ancient scholars, with their devotion to celestial precision, would have been the first to notice. There are even theories suggesting consciousness interacts with time, that perception itself can warp when the brain encounters unknown phenomena. These ideas remain controversial because they challenge the assumption that time is external and objective. Most institutions avoid exploring such concepts, They are too disruptive, too speculative, too reminiscent of science fiction. Yet the ancient accounts persist, daring us to question the boundaries of what we think we know. Perhaps the real reason we ignore these theories is simple. Accepting them would mean accepting that reality is far less stable than we imagine. Humanity clings to the belief that time flows steadily, an unbroken line stretching from past to present to future. This belief comforts us. It gives structure to our memories, meaning to our choices, and predictability to our world. But the ancient anomalies challenge this illusion. They suggest that time may not be rigid but pliable, capable of bending or even breaking under conditions we barely comprehend. When we examine the ancient records collectively, a picture emerges of a universe far less orderly than we assume. Days repeat, nights elongate, moments loop, the sun hesitates, events appear twice. For the scribes who observed them, these fractures must have felt like glimpses into a hidden mechanism, a reminder that beneath the apparent smoothness of time lies a system complex enough to malfunction. Modern society rarely confronts these possibilities. Our clocks tick with comforting precision. Our technology reinforces the illusion of stability. Yet the ancient testimonies remain, enduring through centuries as quiet contradictions to everything we believe. They force us to question whether our understanding of time is merely a simplified model, a convenient approximation of something far stranger. If the ancients witnessed real temporal disturbances, then time may not be a river flowing in one direction. It may be a landscape, shifting, unpredictable, occasionally revealing fractures that defy explanation. And if time can crack, even briefly, then the world we know rests on a far more fragile foundation than we care to admit. Across cultures, the ancients attempted to communicate something about time, something we have either forgotten or chosen to ignore. The Maya carved it into stone. The Chinese wrote it into imperial logs. The Egyptians recorded it in sacred scrolls. The Greeks debated it in philosophical texts. Each civilization in its own language hinted at the same truth. Time is not infallible. The repeated motifs are unmistakable. Days that reappear, hours that vanish, cosmic cycles that pause, individuals who return to moments already lived. These accounts were not created in isolation. They were not stories crafted for entertainment. They were warnings, observations of a universe more dynamic than we imagine. Perhaps the ancients understood that time occasionally reveals its hidden currents, exposing the deeper structure beneath the surface flow. Perhaps they believed future generations would encounter similar anomalies and need these records as guidance. Or perhaps they simply documented their confusion, hoping someone in the distant future would decipher what they could not. When their testimonies converge, they form a message scattered across continents. Time is alive, shifting, responsive, and sometimes it breaks. Whether these were cosmic events, natural phenomena, or glimpses into a forgotten science, the ancients tried to preserve the truth. The question is whether we are willing to hear it. After exploring every anomaly, every testimony, every fragment of ancient insight, one question remains. If time can bend, pause, or loop, what force bends it? What hand shapes the flow we take for granted? The ancients offered no definitive answer. They documented what they saw, not why it happened. Their silence leaves us standing at the edge of understanding, staring into a vast unknown. Perhaps the anomalies were natural expressions of a universe still growing, shifting, or pulsing with energies beyond our detection. Perhaps they were interactions with realms we cannot yet access. Perhaps they were warnings, reminders that time is not the rigid structure we imagine, but a delicate system vulnerable to fractures. Or perhaps time is far more complex than any human civilization, ancient or modern, has ever realized. The mystery endures not because we lack evidence, but because the evidence challenges everything we believe. The timeline we trust may be only a shadow of a deeper reality, and the ancient witnesses may have glimpsed that reality flickering through the cracks. In the end, we are left with the same haunting question the ancients faced. If time trembles, what trembles with it?